This is for educational use only. Our group is allowing our instructor, Mr. Roldan Ardines, to use this as an educational material. So, introduction to the study of globalization by Manfred Steger. First of all, our learning objectives. Differentiate the competing conceptions of globalization from the understanding of Manfred Steger. Identify the underlying philosophies of the varying definitions of globalizations. And lastly, agree on a working definition of globalization for the course.
Hi everyone, this is Cadet Cal Jurisibus from the University of Cebu Maritime Education and Training Center. So, what is globalization? Alright, so the term globalization, as Michael Frieden notes in his editorial, it refers to a range of process nesting under one rather unwidely epithet, not an ideology. It is a conceptual clumsiness partly results from the fact that global flows take place in various physical and mental dimensions, which Arjun Appadurai helpfully categorizes into ethnoscapes, technoscapes, mediascapes, financescapes, and eduscapes. So the word globalization has been used to refer to a process, a situation, a system, a force, and an era in which academic and popular literature. Given that these labels compete with one another and have very distinct meanings, their indiscriminate use is frequently ambiguous and cause confusion. On the other hand, a set of social processes that are believed to change our current social condition into one of globality should be referred to as globalization. Therefore, the underlying issue with globalization is the evolution of human touch. In fact, that saying globalization is happening includes these three crucial facts. First is that the modernism that gradually emerged from the 16th century forward is being left behind. Second, we are heading in the direction of new postmodern global condition. Third, we have not yet arrived there. In fact, the term globalization, like modernization and other verbal nouns ending in ization, implies a type of dynamism best described by the idea of development or unfolding along identifiable patterns. Michael Frieden makes a compelling case in a recent article on shifting ideological boundaries that the current fragmentation of established ideologies and the revived uncertainty concerning whether ideology still exists have highlighted the challenge of capturing the shifting morphologies of political belief systems. The British political theorist suggests two fruitful lines of inquiry to address this issue. First, to challenge the implicit holism in the notion of ideological family, and the second is to question the dominant conventions of classifying and categorizing ideologies with a view to establishing the extent to which they constitute useful clusters. When looking more truly at the first line of inquiry, Frieden briefly mentions globalism as a political holistic competitor, but swiftly returns to the pessimistic position that it is much too early to pronounce on globalism's status as an ideology. In order to further understand of the second line of inquiry, Frieden suggests creative thoughts exercises that will provide us insight into some organizational element according to which ideologies can be categorized. In fact, he concludes his editorial with a concept for an experimental reclassification based on a few characteristics of human behavior, including arrogance, aversion to failure, gregariousness, complacency, fragility, insubordination, and self depreciation. The article by Frieden has a lot of good qualities. First off, It teaches students about ideology, the need of remembering the political belief systems or transient constellations with a dynamic morphologies that necessitate regular academic re-evaluations. It forces contemporary scholars of ideology to reconsider outmoded popular and customary categorization schemes that could obfuscate rather than illuminate. As a result, researchers must be prepared to rethink, update, and maybe replace outmoded conceptual morphologies that no longer adequately depict the dynamics of actual political belief systems. This requires scholars to be open to the potential of radical ideology shifts. Thirdly, by urging experimental thinking exercises to redraw existing ideological borders and recognize ideological systems. It demonstrates significant intellectual inventiveness. Despite sympathizing with Frieden's two suggested methodological lines of inquiry and sharing his interest in altering ideological systems, I must disagree with his succinct analysis of globalism. In contrast to Frieden, the article argues that it is still too early to declare globalism to be an ideology. In fact, it will work to prove that globalism is the dominant political belief systems of our time, against which all of its opponents must be defined themselves. It does this by demonstrating that globalism not only represents a set of political ideas and beliefs coherent enough to merit the status of ideology. It may be possible to avoid the problem of circular definitions by saying that globalization refers to a collection of social processes that move us closer to the state of globality. But this only gives us one way to define process, a move towards greater interdependence and integration. We learn very little about globalization's remaining characteristics from such a broad definition. However, despite these stark constraints in viewpoint, there is some thematic convergence in the numerous academic attempts to pinpoint the key characteristics of globalization process. Think about the five important definitions of globalization listed below or listed in the PowerPoint. For instance, they contend that the Penniman score possesses four different properties or traits. First, globalization entails the development of new social networks and the expansions of already established ones, as well as activities that increasingly transcend established political, economical, or cultural and geographic barriers. Second is growth and stretching of social relationships, activities, and interdependencies are examples of globalization's second attribute. The global financial markets of today feature round the clock electronic trading. So, third, globalization implies a quickening and intensification of social interactions. The internet transmits far off information in a matter of seconds, while satellites gives users such access to real-time images of far off events. According to Anthony Giddens' concept, the intensification of global social interactions cause distant events to have an impact on local events and vice versa. Fourth, social interconnections and interdependencies do not just develop, grow, and intensify on an objective, material level. So the subjective plane of human awareness is also involved in the process of globalization, as noted by Roldán Robertson in his definition. Therefore, it is important to remember that the term globalization also describes the enormous acceleration of social interactions, as well as people's growing awareness of this phenomena.
The history of globalization. Globalization is often referred to as a contemporary or modern phenomenon. It is studied from a historical perspective using the historical record, spanning through centuries or millennia. In this section, we will present the literature that examines the historical aspects of globalization, its origin, its history of international economics and trade, the history of international finance and exchange in global markets. Globalization began in the prehistoric period on 10,000 BCE to 3500 BCE. During this time, prehistoric people spread across the globe in small groups of hunters and gatherers. This group of people were preoccupied with hunting, as it is their main source of living and survival. Not until this fleeting mode of social interaction changed dramatically about 10,000 years ago, when humans took the crucial step of producing their own food, as domestication of animals and the growth of settled farming existed. As agrarian societies developed and the need for food was no longer the primary motive, the society began to differentiate a hierarchy and allows to the growth of different social classes. The patriarchal society of settled groups which still exists today was developed during this time. However, there was a limited communication between small settled societies. The communication was limited by the technology available in this time. This is why this period did not see much in a way of globalization. However, it was a great time of spread of humanity. It was only towards the end of this epoch that centrally administered forms of agriculture, religion, bureaucracy, and warfare slowly emerged as the key agents of intensifying modes of social exchange that would involve a growing number of societies in many regions of the world.
This is Ansel Kirkdan. I'm about to report the pre-modern period of globalization during the pre-modern era. It is a process of expansion strengthened by writing invention, innovations, empire, migration, and trade linkage. Historically, way back in this era, it already abides by the definition that is multifaceted process that deals with the creation, expansion, acceleration, and connection, exchange of technology, culture, religion, commodities, even as well as diseases, that greatly facilitated the coordination of complex social activities that encourage large state formations and a web of economic, political, and socio-cultural interdependencies between empire and continents. So, what is the pre-modern period? The age of empires, as some states succeeded in establishing permanent rule over other states. The resulting vast territorial accumulations formed the basis of the following Egypt, Egyptian kingdoms, Persian Empire, American Empire of the Aztecs, Songhai, and the Ottoman Empire. All these empires fostered the multiplication and extension of a long-distance communication and the exchange of culture and technology, commodities, and diseases. The most enduring and technologically advanced of these vast pre-modern conglomerates was undoubtedly the Chinese Empire. So let's talk about the Silk Road. The most extensive of these trade routes, it linked the Chinese and Roman empires with Parthian traders serving as skilled intermediaries even 1,300 years after the Silk Road first reached the Italian peninsula. Towards the end of the pre-modern period, the existing global trade network consisted of several interlocking trade circuits that connected the most populous region of Eurasia and northern eastern of Africa.
Good day, everyone. My name is Decadent John Albert Faunilin, and I'll be reporting about the early modern period around 1500 to 1750. So let's begin. The early modern period, 1500 to 1750. The term modernity has become associated with the 18th century European Enlightenment project of developing objective science, achieving a universal form of morality and law, and liberating rational modes of thought and social organization from the perceived irrationalities of myth, religion, and political tyranny. The label early modern then refers to the period between the Enlightenment and the Renaissance. During these 2 centuries, Europe and its social practices served as the primary catalyst for globalization. Having contributed little to technology and other civilization achievements before about 1000 CE, Europeans northwest of the Alps greatly benefited from the diffusion of technological innovations originating in Islamic and Chinese cultural spheres, as their efforts were aided by such innovations as mechanized printing, sophisticated wind and water mills, extensive postal systems, revised maritime technologies, and advanced navigation techniques. Add the enormous impact of the Reformation and the related liberal political idea of limited government, and we have identified the main forces behind the qualitative leap that greatly intensified demographic, cultural, ecological, and economic flows between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Of course, the rise of European metropolitan centers and their affiliated merchant classes represented another important factor responsible for strengthening globalization tendencies during the early modern period, embodying the new values of individualism and unlimited material accumulation. European economic entrepreneurs laid the foundation of what later scholars would call the capitalist or the capitalist world system. By the early 1600s, national joint stock companies like the Dutch and British East India companies were founded for the express purpose of setting up profitable overseas trade posts. As these innovative corporations grew in size and stature, they acquired the power to regulate most intercontinental economic transactions, and in the process implementing social institutions and the cultural practices that enabled later colonial governments to place these foreign regions under direct political rule. Ultimately, evolving from the Westphalian state system, the sovereign Tertullian nation state had emerged by 1648 as a modern container of social life. As the early modern period drew to a close, interdependencies among nation states were multiplying as well as increasing in density.
Hi, good day everyone. So I am the Cadet John Carl Villegas, and my part is to discuss about the modern period of globalization. So by the late 18th century, Australia and Pacific Island were slowly incorporated into European-dominated network of political, economic, and cultural exchange. So globalization in the modern era will examine the social, political, and economic basis for the phenomenon frequently referred to as globalization. So the course will discuss competing theories regarding the rise of globalization, as well as the divergent consequences that this process has left in its wake in different communities around the world. So, while social, economic, political, and environmental inequalities are built into some aspects of globalization, the phenomenon also offers new opportunities and alternatives for development for resistance. So, indeed, the volume of world trade increased dramatically between 1850 and 1914, guided by the activities of multinational banks, capitals, goods flowers across the borders. Relatively freely, the steering-based gold standard made possible the worldwide circulation. So, um, since ancient times, humans have sought distant places to settle, produce, and exchange goods and services enabled by improvements in technology and transportation. So, Globalization encouraged to each country to specialize in what it produces, best using in least amount of resources. Railways, merchandise, shipping, and 20th century intercontinental air transport managed to overcome the last remaining geographical obstacles to the establishment of genuine global infrastructure, while at the same time lowering transportation costs. So, what makes globalization possible is the ever increasing capacity for an efficiency of how people and things move and communicate. So, in years past, people across the globe did not have the ability to no communicate and could not interact without difficulty. Finally, the 20th century arrival of mass circulations, newspapers and magazines, film and television further enhance a growing consciousness of rapidly shrinking world. So, um, we know, as I see nowadays, a phone, instant messages, fax, or video conference can still easily be used to connect people throughout the world. Additionally, anyone with the funds can book a plane flight, show up halfway across the world in a matter of hours. In short, the friction of distance is lessened, and the world begins to be metaphorically shrink.
Good day, everyone. I'm the cadet Mark Anthony Tabanao. So, I am the part of Group 1. So, my part of our presentation is the contemporary period from 1970. So, that brings us today when a new wave of globalization is again upon us in a world increasingly dominated by two global powers, the US and China. The new frontier of the globalization is the cyber world. With the information again, globalization went into overdrive, advances in computer and communication. Technology launches a new global era and redefine what it means to be connected. So the digital economy, it is infancy during the fifth wave of globalization, in now becoming a force of reckon with through e-commerce and digital services, 3D printing, and each further enabled by artificial intelligence, but threatened by cross-border hacking and cyber attacks. So it is in this world that Chinese President Xi Jinping addressed in the topic of globalization and its speech in Davos in January 2017. Some blame economy globalization for the chaos in the world. So the world of today is considered to be as a world of technology, and the trending world as it seems most, if not all, depends on the power of technology. Personally, technology makes our world become innovative and progressive. What we can do and make for years can be done in an instant.
Next would be the ideologies and theories of globalization. So, according to Steger, there are three main types of globalization. Firstly, market globalism, which seeks to endow globalization with free market norms and neoliberal meanings, or in other words, refers to the process of promoting and selling goods and services in an increasingly interdependent and interested global economy. Next would be justice globalism, which is the construct of an alternative vision of globalization and refers to the political ideas and values associated with the social alliances. And lastly would be religious globalism, which in this context can be understood as a process of realignment in this global religious station. And so the next would be the eight theories of globalization that relate to broader imaginaries and ontologies. Firstly would be the theory of liberalism, which is the process of globalization as a market-led extension of modernization, which is the result of human desires for economic welfare and political liberty. Next would be the theory of political realism, which is the interest of questions of state and power and the pursuit of national interest and conflict between states. Or, in other words, is the view of international politics that stresses its competitive and conflictual side. Next would be the theory of Marxism, which is the principal concern of modes of production, social exploitation through unjust distribution, and social emancipation, or in other words, serves as a theoretical basis for the underdeveloped countries towards progression into modernization. Next would be the theory of constructivism, which concentrates to the ways of social actors and constructs to their world, or in other words, asserts that significant aspects of internation relations shaped by ideational factors. Next would be the theory of postmodernism, which is the highlight of the significance of structural power in the construction of identities, norms, and knowledge. Or, in other words, refers to the perspective of changing modern policies and functions into more developed ones. Next would be the theory of feminism, which is a theory that puts emphasis on social construction of masculinity and femininity, and its main concern lies behind the status of women, particularly their structural subordination to men, as they have been tended to be marginalized, silenced, and violated in global communication. Next would be the theory of transformationalism, which is a theory that has been expounded by David Held and his colleagues, and argues that it should be understood as a complex set of interconnecting relationships and argues that the flow of culture is not one way. And lastly would be the theory of eclecticism, that has each one of six ideal type of social theories of globalization and highlights and puts emphasis on technology and institution building, national interest and interstate competition, capital accumulation and class struggle, identity and knowledge of construction, rationalism and cultural imperialism, and masculinized and subordination of women.
Polarized five-scale for globalization. As we have already established, globalization refers to the increasing pace of scope of interconnections, crisscrossing of the globe. Anthropolog- Anthropologist Arjun Appadurai has discussed this in terms of five specific scapes of or flows. I do, I do, I do escapes. It is the one of the more difficult concepts described and understand with respect to global cultural flow. In every short order, we can define it as conversation of audio, text, image, and the resultant ideas expressed therein, or in the other word, refers to the idea, symbols, and narrative that have spread around the globe. Finance escape. This refers to the flow of money across political borders, like the other flow discussed by Appadurai. This phenomenon has been occurring for centuries. It refers to the rapid movement of money across borders. Media escape. This refers to the flow of media across border. In early historic periods, it could take weeks, or even months for entertainment and education content to travel from the location other Madurai wrote of the power international media to send news information across the globe at a rapid rate. Technoescape. This refers to the global arrange and movement of all sorts of technology across worldwide boundaries. Ethnoescape. This refers to the flow of people across boundaries while people such as labor, migrants, or refugees travel out of necessity or in search of better opportunities for themselves and their families. Leisure travelers are also part of his escape or in other words, and represent the movement of people around the
I'm
world.
Martin Bibicaldo. I'm going to explain the globalization. Benefits of globalization can be found in numerous fields. It increases the cultural interaction and simultaneously develop economies everywhere. And also, it permitted business to business financial transaction, altering the nature of the workforce. The engine of globalization, an economic example, the foremost unmistakable impacts of globalizations are certainly the ones influencing the financial world. Globalization has driven to a sharp increment in exchange and financial trades. It because of duplications of budgetary exchanges. The negative effects of globalization on cultural loss are consumerism is a large multinational companies promote their products globally, and brands like Coca-Cola, KFC, and Nike are prevalent across the world. And second, the language is a key of expressions of cultural diversity. The critics of globalization claim it marginalizes some languages and may even cause some languages to die out. Others say this is just myth. And lastly, the poverty. Some United Nations claim that globalization increases poverty, particularly among the young, old men, old women, indigenous peoples, and migrant.